Hello everyone, I'm Houze Song, fellow at MacroPolo, the think tank at the Paulson Institute, and I also lead the research on Chinese economy. I just finished an outlook on Chinese economy titled Strong but Short Stimulus Expected to Stabilize Growth. Today I will answer questions and share my views on the trajectory of Chinese economy in 2022. We don't think there will be any significant change to the current COVID policy anytime soon. This is because we think that at this moment, and probably in the coming months as well, the current zero COVID policy still offers more benefits than costs. The benefit is primarily in the forms of public health and political support for the government. While there are some costs, mostly economic costs, but we think that the economic costs is actually more modest than most people believe, since it still offers more benefits than costs. So we think that the Chinese government will continue its zero COVID policy for a few more months at least. As for the impact on the economy, we think that there are some impact, but it's probably a manageable impact. And we base this assessment on two pieces of evidence. One is if you look at the recent economic data, it's pretty clear that either from the demand side or the supply side, COVID is not the key factor behind the recent slowdown. On the demand side, if one believes that Chinese consumption has been weak because household is afraid of COVID, which forced them to cut back services expenditure, then actually the data suggests otherwise. This is because online shopping, which is affected by COVID, has been growing actually slower than the overall retail sale, which suggests COVID is not that big factor behind the recent consumption weakness. Also on the supply side, the most easiest way to look at how big an impact COVID is accountable for the recent slowdown is to compare the statistic in Q4 and Q3. During Q4, there are more COVID outbreaks, and there were also more lockdowns. But both industrial production and overall GDP growth had accelerated in Q4 compared to Q3. As such, both demand and supply side picture suggests that the COVID impact is probably secondary to factors such as tight monetary policy, energy shortage. As we believe that Beijing is already changing its policy stance from a restrictive to neutral, a recent growth drag such as energy shortage is also improving. So as such, we believe that despite COVID and the new Omicron variant, the economy can achieve somewhat better growth compared to 2021. We think that despite Federal Reserve tightening, Beijing still has substantial room for monetary easing. I think the bigger factor is really Beijing's intention rather than their capability will determine the stimulus outlook. Because we believe that Beijing will only pursue a relatively modest growth target, something around 5%, which will not require a very large stimulus. As such, we don't think there will be a very further monetary easing after Q1, and we believe that we probably are already at the peak stimulus at this moment. Last year, the policy uncertainties was probably the highest in recent years. This year, we think Beijing will tread more carefully. This is because that their near-term focus is on stabilizing growth, which means they probably will not do anything that has very disruptive to the economy. Moreover, this year is also a political transition year. There will be the 20th Party Congress in Q3 around October this year. So this is another reason that we think that will make Beijing to be more cautious than last year and not introducing very disruptive policies. The factors that will look for Q2 and beyond, the number one is labor market. This is because as we believe that stimulus will be relatively short-lived, the economic outlook for the remainder of this year will largely depend on organic demand growth, for example, consumption growth. And consumption growth, in turn, depends on household income growth. During 2021, household income growth had been growing much slower than the overall GDP growth, which has constrained household consumption expenditure. And we believe unless there is improvement in the labor market, household consumption is unlikely to rebound. As a result, we'll look very carefully to see how the recent stimulus benefited the labor market, because continual labor market is kind of like the crucial determinant for the economic outlook for the remainder of this year. Another main concern about Chinese economy is what the impact will the property slowdown be. It's probably more modest than most people believe. And one key reason is that we think that the official statistic on both property and land has been overstated, and the true size of both property sector and land finance had been smaller than what the official statistics suggest. First, on property sale, we think that the true size of the property sale is only 14% of GDP rather than 16% in the headline number. And the reason is because we believe the official property sale number has a double counting problem. Namely, that since 2016, we see an increasing trend of property developers setting up joint ventures with other property developers. This is largely caused by strict restrictions on developer borrowing, which forced the property developers to turn into those joint ventures to develop new projects. For example, like all indicators related to the size of joint ventures has more than tripled since 2016, suggesting this joint venture has become more widespread phenomenon recently. And why does it cause double counting? For example, let's consider a case that property developer A and B together they establish a joint venture. Each owns 50% of this joint venture. In theory, that both property developers should only report 50% of the sales by this joint ventures in their income statement. But in reality, many property developers actually include 100% of the sales by joint ventures. In this way, the sales of joint ventures are usually counted twice in the aggregate property sale number. We think this double counting is roughly at least 12% of total property sale, and probably more. So even using very conservative estimate, we think that true property sale is only 14% in 2021 instead of the 16% in official statistic. And then there's also data exaggeration problem in the land finance. We all know that land finance matters very much for the local governments who counted on selling land to finance their investment and other expenditures. But however, the true size of land finance is likely only 70% of the headline number. And the reason is because local governments usually sell land to their own entities, for example, those so-called LGFV, local government financing vehicles. And although those fake land are usually registered included in official land finance numbers, but in reality, local government usually return the land sale revenue to this LGFV. So in effect, this means that those land are given free, and local government has not received any revenue from selling those land. And we have based on our estimate that we think true land sale is only 70% of the official number, which means that true land sale is only around 5.4% of GDP in 2021 instead of 7.6% in the official statistics. And the finding that both property and land finance are actually smaller than they look to be has both good and bad implications. The good implication is that because they are smaller, which means that their slowdowns will have a more manageable impact on the broader economy. But on the other hand, less property sale and less land sale also means property developer and local government have less income than they reported. Given that property developer and local government are the two biggest borrowers in the financial system, lower income means they have more difficulty to servicing their debt. In the case of local government, their biggest creditor is the banking system. Because local governments comparatively more resourceful than property developers, we think that lending to local government is at least in the near term is relatively safe. On the other hand, because property developers have less access to financing compared to local government, their creditors are in a worse position. The main creditors for property developers are shadow banking and households who purchased pre-sale units, because the millions of Chinese households who purchased pre-sale from property developers constitute a potential social stability issues. We think the Chinese government will prioritize the interest of the owners of pre-sale unit ahead of the shadow banking system, which means that in the near term, the financial risk will be mostly concentrated in the shadow banking system. Moreover, recently, because developers have been forced to scale back investment because of the slowdown in property sale, local governments have increasingly turned to LGFV as a buyer for land, which means the problem of land sale exaggeration has actually gotten worse in recent months and probably will continue so in the coming months as well, which means the financial risk, implications of the land financing exaggeration problem will getting worse in the coming months. So in sum, we think that for Chinese economy in 2022, people should pay more attention to labor market improvement and maybe relatively less attention to COVID and property, because we believe that labor market will have a bigger role in determining the trajectory of the Chinese economy in 2022 compared to COVID and property sector. Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and hope to see you again at the next Decoding China event.